Hi everyone, it is Sunday, the 10th of October, and so it is time for me to do the next episode of my Robert Zemeckis series on the sequels to Back to the Future that were released in late '89 and May of 1990. This is not the first time that something like this was done. Shoot two sequels at the same time instead of years apart and then release them within months of each other. Superman and Superman 2 were originally supposed to be a production like this. However, Richard Donner, the director of the first one, while shooting footage of the second one, got fired and replaced by someone, and there was a lot of reworking going on. But Back to the Future 2 and 3 set the template for movies such as the Matrix sequels and the Pirates of the Caribbean sequels, and Kill Bill to a certain extent, although Kill Bill was originally intended to just be one big film, and they decided to make it two films instead because there was just so much good stuff in there. They didn't want to cut any of it, they wanted to use it all, so they made it into two films. Back to the Future, of course, is a classic and just a wonderful film, which makes these sequels all the more unnecessary. There was a lot of sort of wedged in character traits for Marty. He's given this sort of a hair-trigger temper whenever people make fun of him that spurs some of the plot developments along. And the whole setup for the opening of Back to the Future is basically like taking what was essentially just a good joke at the end of part one and having to actually treat it as though it was actually going on for real in the film. Now, for those of you who haven't seen Back to the Future Part 1, so much of what happens in Part 2 is not going to make any sense to you at all, and Part 3 for that matter as well. So, you know, I wouldn't even bother watching those, okay? Just stick with the original. My advice is just to stick with the original on the both of them. And for those of you who have seen Back to the Future, of course, you remember that the joke at the end of the film is Doc has come from the future, some point in the future, and is back in 1985 and tells Marty and his girlfriend Jennifer, "It's your kids, Marty, something has got to be done about your kids." You know, they're in trouble or something like that. So then they hop in the car, and as it turns out, the car has been given a futuristic makeover, and it launches off into the sky and then rockets away, and that's the end of the movie. A really good joke for the end of the movie because of the technological, you know, gag of having the car fly off into time rather than just drive off. But what happened was when they started the second film, they realized they had to sort of make good on what that last thing at the end was, because in of course the original movie, Marty had to deal with this problem with his parents, and at the end Marty has to go off and deal with some problem with his kids. But there's one little catch here. And that is that if Marty and his girlfriend Jennifer travel 30 years into the future, then they will essentially be missing for 30 years until they show up in 2015. And they won't be around to live those 30 years and get married and have the kids grow up and go through something bad, which they then have to solve. So I kind of expected the first scene of the movie to be Marty and Doc coming back from the future, back to 1985, and Marty going, "Yeah, you know, Doc, you know, there's no way that we would have been able to do anything about our kids now because we haven't had them yet, you know, we can't go to the future because then we won't be around to have the kids." But the movie just kind of ignores that. It goes to the future, and there's the future to 2015 where everything is kind of crazy looking, you know, and there's all kinds of weird new technology and what have you. But not only is Marty and his girlfriend there, but his kids are there as well, which is ridiculous because they shouldn't be. You know, it shouldn't allow for that. By coming back from the future, Doc has seen, of course, what could happen to Marty and his girlfriend should they get married and have kids. But those are only under the circumstances that Marty and Jennifer stay where they are. Once he brings them to the future, then he's essentially tampering with the timeline that he just took a look at. So, you know, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work at all, logically speaking. But once you get past all that, if you ignore all that, then the movie is kind of fun. They get to the future and they deal with Biff. Biff is, you know, the bully who George kind of showed him what for at the end of part one. And his son, which is causing problems for Marty's son, But then there's all sorts of complications involving them running into Marty and Jennifer and their kids, in the future, and trying to escape before anything really bad happens, if there's paradoxes and what have you. And along the way, Marty discovers this booklet that you can buy in any store in 2015, which has sports statistics in it, a sports almanac. And he says, hey, wouldn't it be a good idea if I bought this book and then took it back to 1985 and placed some bets and made money? Because the results of any college game, any professional sports game, they're all in here. I could make a lot of money. And Doc's like, Marty, we can't do that. That's not what the time machine is for. But older Biff from 1985 and 1955, who was ragging on George, all the way back then, here's what's going on. And he discovers that, hey, this guy Doc Brown built a time machine and they've been using it travel in time, So he takes a sports almanac and he steals the time machine and takes it all the way back to 1955 and gives it to his younger self. So when Marty and Doc return to 1985 after they straighten everything out in 2015, they discover that Biff Tannen is now the richest, most powerful man in Hill Valley, and everything has changed. Everything about Marty's family has changed, about Doc's own future has changed, so they realize they have to go back to 1955, intercept the book as Biff is giving it to his younger self, so this horrible present will never actually take place. So that's the exciting part, basically. Now, there's some fun stuff in this movie, but there's also some not so good stuff. The fun stuff is Michael J. Fox, who plays Marty, is playing a lot of other members of his family. When you have characters running into different versions of themselves, they use, you know how they took basically Armie Hammer's face and put it on another actor to make him twins for The Social Network? They didn't have that technology back in the late 80s. Instead, they had what they called a VistaGlide, which is a computer-controlled camera system that they would bring to the set. And this camera basically would replicate the exact same move however many times they wanted it to. So first Michael J. Fox gets dressed up as Marty, and then he occupies one part of the space and runs his lines, and then after they finish that take, he'll then put on the Marty Jr. costume, and then he'll put on his older Marty costume so that he can play all the different parts in the scene. And when you have all these identical camera moves that are exact down to the millimeter, those three shots then can be blended together into a single shot that makes it look like there are three Michael J. Foxes in the scene. And this is a really, really time-consuming process, but I read a lot about it, and I thought it was really, really cool back then. They also used it for the David Cronenberg film Dead Ringers. As you recall, Jeremy Irons plays identical twins in that movie. And so there's a number of scenes in which you have two Jeremy Irons walking down a hallway side by side or doing whatever, and they would do the same thing with this computer-controlled camera. It's a really, really time-consuming process, and probably a lot easier now with CGI. They can just drop somebody into the shot wherever they need to go and fix lighting problems or what have you. They didn't have all the sophisticated computerized digital imaging that they have now. So it took a lot more work. Yeah, so there's some good stuff about this movie. But some of the bad stuff, I think, is that it's Zemeckis still is sort of in Roger Rabbit mode. Everything is just really over the top and cartoonish. A lot of the acting isn't very good. Tom Wilson, who plays Biff, he's fine as the regular versions of Biff, but when you get in the different versions of like his son, and then in part 3 you've got the Old West version of Biff named Mad Dog Tannen. He's just really, really over the top. Also, Crispin Glover really didn't want to come back for the sequel. He plays George McFly. So what they did is they used some old footage of Crispin Glover from the first movie, and they used a body double, and they used a similar looking guy with makeup for some of the other scenes in which George needs to appear just sparingly. And what happened was they sort of put his name on the film even though he didn't have anything to do with it, didn't want to be part of it. So Crispin Glover ended up suing the company and getting the Screen Actors Guild rules changed. Because they didn't own his likeness. They couldn't just, force him to be in the movie by using other footage of him. So he basically enacted a few new laws there by way of that lawsuit. And that's, when going back to Kill Bill, originally that was supposed to be one movie. So when they decided to split it into 2 movies and have it be 2 separate releases, That means Uma Thurman now had 2 salaries to collect instead of just 1. Those are the rules. If you're in 2 movies, you get paid twice. Even though she didn't shoot any more footage for that second movie, they just decided to make it 2 movies. So that's one of the benefits to actors for a decision like that. But if there was any bad blood between Crispin Glover and Robert Zemeckis, it's been resolved now because Crispin Glover went on to do Beowulf, which is a movie that came out 5 years ago, one of his performance capture animated movies. Now for part 3, after they sort out the mess in part 2, Doc goes back to 1885, 100 years before the present in this series. And he's a frontier guy in the Old West. He becomes a blacksmith, and he sends a letter to Marty in 1955 telling him to talk to the 1955 version of Doc Brown and help him get back to the Old West. You know, so they can sort out the trouble there. So things get kind of complicated that way. And again, you've got Marty playing multiple roles. He plays like one of his old ancestors. The weird part, though, is that this early version of this early ancestor from Marty's family, Seamus McFly, is married to a woman who's played by Lea Thompson, who of course plays Michael J. Fox's mother in the series. So instead of having the actress who plays Jennifer play Seamus's wife, I don't know why they needed to keep using Lea Thompson over and over again. They could just as easily cast some other actress rather than have it be Lea Thompson again. It's just a little weird. Ends up sleeping with his mother after all. It's just a little nuts. So part 3 is a little bit better than part 2. It's a little more restrained. It's a little more character oriented. And although they have this sort of silly little personality quirk of Marty's, is that he just doesn't like being called chicken. He doesn't like being called a coward or whatever. So that makes him do stupid things. And this all ties back into something that happened in 1985, or I should say something that hasn't happened yet to Marty in 85, but that everyone in the future keeps referring to and that Doc knows about. So yeah, they're light, entertaining movies. You know, they're kind of silly. Part 2 is pretty complicated. Overall, they're fun, but ultimately really inconsequential. They don't need to exist. And I'm really glad they took that to be continued off of part 1 for the recent DVD that I got. So, yeah, part 2 and part 3. And after that, he did Death Becomes Her, which came out in 1992, and I'll be doing a video on that on the 10th. That should be Wednesday. This upcoming Wednesday, I'll do my video on Death Becomes Her that has Meryl Streep and Bruce Willis and Goldie Hawn in it. By the way, I want to say a thank you to Aaron of the Film Speak channel who did a video response to Back to the Future. Appreciate it. And I know at least one of the persons said they were going to do a video on Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which would be great. I'd love to see that. So thanks for watching again, guys, and I'll see you again real soon. See you on Wednesday.